Hi, everybody. So in this video, we're going to do a little bit of practice about comparative advantage in trade. Usually that really helps clear up some of the misconceptions and probably my bad teaching actually is really what it helps clear up. So there isn't going to be slides below. It's just going to be over here on the side with the document camera. So let's get started. Imagine that you have two people, and a guy named Aiello and a guy named Myers, and they can grade AP history tests or they can grade AP psych exams, and they both have one day to do it. So they've one person and they've got a pen and they've got one day. And if they sit them down, Aiello can grade 100 history exams, and he could also, instead, he could grade 120 psych exams. So he could do either one, right? And we assume that in between those, he could do any combination in between, but we're not as much worried about that. With Myers, he's much faster. He could do 200 history exams and 150 psych exams. So who has absolute advantage in a psych exam? Well, 150 is bigger than 120, 150 bigger than 120, so we would say Myers. Then we look at it and we say, who has absolute advantage in history? Well, 200 is bigger than 100, so we'd say Myers does as well. That doesn't necessarily mean that Myers should do it all by himself, right? Again, we're going to look at comparative advantage. What's the opportunity cost for Myers to grade one psych test? What's the opportunity cost for Aiello to grade one history? So for us to do that, we're going to set up that comparative advantage table. So remember, we're going to do one history equals, because we're in the history column, the outside number 120 over 100. 120 over 100. And that is equal to 6 over 5, which is 1 1/5. And that's 1 1/5 psych exams. So what we're saying when we say that is that every time Aiello grades a history test, he gives up the opportunity to grade 1 1/5 of a psych test. Now we'll do it from the other side. One psych test for Aiello, how much is that going to cost him? Well, it's going to be 100 over 120, which is 5/6 of a history test. Then we're going to switch down. We'll say for Myers, how much does it cost him to do a history test? Well, 150 over 200 is 3/4 of a psych test. And now we can actually see who has comparative advantage in it, right? Now that's not what this question is, but you can see that Myers has a lower opportunity cost than Aiello. 1/3 is less than 1 1/5. We'll say, let's try it out on this side. The outside is 200 over 150. So that's 4/3, which is 1 1/3 of a history test. We notice here that that means Aiello has comparative advantage in grading psych tests, and that Myers has comparative advantage in grading history tests. Now, I'm going to teach you something that I learned a long time ago from a different online YouTube star named Jacob Clifford, who's got a channel named ACDC Econ, and it's called the quick and dirty method. We can quickly determine who has comparative advantage in which, and we don't actually have to do all the math, although it is important to know how to do the math because you're going to get questions that'll say, what's the opportunity cost? But if it's just a question that says, what's the comparative advantage, who has it? There's a quick and dirty method. I'll show you in a second. So let's write the answers here first, though. Myers to grade a psych test. One psych for Myers is 1 1/3 of a history test. And for Aiello to grade one history, that's up here. So that's 1 1/5 of a psych exam. Now, comparative advantage. We already know that comparative advantage in psych is Aiello. And we can even write that's because 5/6 is less than 1 1/3. Right? We're comparing these two numbers. And then this one, we know that he has it in history because 3/4 is less than 1 1/5. Now, I told you there's a quick and dirty method. The quick dirty method is to know something. Know this, number one, you can never have comparative advantage in both things. You just can't, right? And in fact, if they tied, if you ever get a problem where they mathematically tie, then neither one has comparative advantage. So it's possible for each person to have comparative advantage in one thing, or for both of them to have it in neither thing because they tie. But you can't have it in both. It's mathematically impossible. So you're always going to have one person be one and one person be the other. So, you know, Aiello could be history and Myers could be psych, or Myers could be history and Aiello could be psych. Here's how you actually do the quick and dirty. Take 120 and 200. and multiply those together. You end up with 24,000. Okay. Then multiply 150 by 100. You end up with 15,000. Right. So 24,000, 15,000. Which one's bigger? 24,000. That one right here. That's the one that has comparative advantage. I told you it was quick and it's dirty, right? You just feel dirty. You're like, oh, I can't believe that I did that, right? Like I totally cheated on that. But you didn't. If you know that. Now, I'll 100% tell you this: 24,000 and 15,000 have absolutely no meaning whatsoever. The number that you get at the end doesn't mean anything. It's actually just whichever one's bigger if it's an output style problem. Now, that's the quick and dirty method. Don't say that I taught you how to do it. Now, if they were to grade a pile of tests and Glossinger suggested they specialize in trade, who should grade psych? Well, whichever one has comparative advantage in it. So in that case, it's Aiello. Who should grade history? The other guy, Myers. Now we've got some terms of trade questions. If the terms of trade were 3 psych for 2 history, who would benefit? Only Aiello, only Myers, neither, or both? Now I'm going to give you another tip. Okay? Another tip. You can't ever have neither. It's just never an option. Just eliminate it right off the bat. One of them will always be benefiting, or both of them will benefit. Now we're going to be able to test it here very quickly. But 3 psych and 2 history, I think I have a cricket. I'm in my basement, so it wouldn't be surprising. 2 history for 3 psych. Now let's reduce that down to 1 history to 1.5 psych. Okay? And then we take that 1 history to 1.5 psych, and we're going to look up here, right? 1 history to 1.5 psych. And is 1.5 psych between 3/4 and 1 1/5? No, it is not. Right? 1.5 is bigger than Aiello's 1 1/5. So it's bad for Aiello. So we would say only Myers. And we can say, oops, I'm writing that in the wrong spot. Only Myers. And we'd say because 1.5, right, this value, is bigger than Aiello's maximum value of 1 1/5. 1 1/5. Now, you might be just saying like, okay, I get that there's like a mathematical truism here, but what the heck? Like what gives? Why? And here's why. This is going to take a second, so feel free to skip ahead if you're like, I don't really care, but I think it is valuable. Which one is selling these? If you think about like them specializing in trading, well, the one who's producing is Myers because he has comparative advantage in it. And the seller always has a minimum price. They're not willing to sell for below that price. Now, what's the price? Well, for Myers, he's like, I'm willing to grade a history test for psych tests, right? That's what Aiello's going to have to do. And he's like, the minimum price that you're going to have to give me, Aiello, is at least 3/4 of a psych test for every time I give you a history test that's graded. In other words, I have a minimum price, and it's actually set by the opportunity cost. Now, in this case, Aiello is buying them because he doesn't have the comparative advantage, right? So he's generating psych exams. He's cranking those things out, and he's like, gosh, I got a pile of history tests. I'm going to send them over to Myers and have him grade them. But the maximum price that he's willing to pay is 1 1/5 of a psych test. It's the maximum price he'll pay because he's the buyer. So if the price that Myers throws out there is 1.5, Aiello looks at him and goes, dude, that's above my maximum price of 1 1/5. So anything between the two, between 1 1/5 and 3/4, works for both. But if it's above Aiello's maximum price, he's not going to do the deal. And if it's below Myers' minimum, he won't do the deal, right? So that's actually why that's true. Now let's think about 3 psych for 3 history. 3 for 3 is the same as 1 for 1, okay? So let's look back up here and say, is 1 history for 1 psych, is that between the 2 values? Yes, so it's good for both. Both, and because we'd say 3/4 is less than 1, which is less than 1 1/5, right? So you could just use the numbers and say that. Now, if you want to like word it all out, that's fine, but this would be a perfectly valid explanation. So explanations in economics can be really short, and that's a good example. 3 psych for 6 history. 3 psych for 6 history. Let's reduce that down. That's going to be 1 psych for 2 history. So that's going to make us actually switch over one, I'm going to write it up here, one psych for 2 history. We're going to use this side. And the reason that we use this side is just because the one psych is already done for us. If you really wanted to, you could reduce it down and say 1/2 of a psych for 1 history. Right? Those are the same statement, right? 1 psych for 2 history and 1/2 psych for 1 history. And you could reuse this side if you wanted to. I think it's probably just as easy just to say 1 psych for 2 history. Now, is 2 history, is that between these two numbers? Between 5/6 and 1 1/3? No. So, and by the way, who's it bigger, right? It's bigger than Myers, right? It exceeds Myers's maximum price that he's willing to pay. Because from this side of the trade, right, Myers is the one being the buyer. So Myers is like, I'm not going to go any higher than 1 1/3 history test, buddy. And Aiello throws out and he goes, what about 2 histories? Myers is like, 1 1/3 is my maximum price. So only, sorry, that way you can see, only Aiello, because, and we'd say because 2 is bigger than 1 1/3. So hopefully that helps you with terms of trade a little bit. I'll see you next time.